Now, as we reflect with nostalgia into the heydays when I was younger, there were video stores where you could rent movies, games and DVDs. That's all changed as technology evolves, and it's evolving rapidly. Video on demand is now easily accessible to everyone, everywhere through streaming and either platform. Now we ask the question, how has the growing popularity of video on demand impacted new consumers and how we consume media? To answer this and discuss this evolution of media consumption, and joined by Leslie Adams, Sales Director at Streaming Experts Reach Africa. Leslie, good afternoon to you, and thank you for joining us. I don't know how far back you can recall the days of the Betacam, the DVDs, and even cassette tapes. But we've, of course, moved on very quickly from that. How far has the whole evolution been?
I think one of the most significant changes in how we consume content is very simple. I think the TV, as we've grown up to know, whether it's with consuming DVD, multi-choice DSTV, Mnet before that, was simply free-to-air as we watch generally, is that the TV was a central big screen in your home, which you came to consume content on. The biggest change that we see right now, not only locally but globally, is that TV is wherever your screen is, which is in your pocket, in your backpack, wherever you are. If you have a screen, you can consume your content as you want to.
Yes, and the content is also very diverse. You don't have to traditionally wait for your sofa experience of sitting in front of the television at a particular hour, 7 o'clock, to see the news. It is happening by the minute, and this is how consumers have now become accustomed to consuming content.
We describe it really as the age of curation, right? So very much before, we were sort of appointment viewing. At 6 p.m. you watch this show, at 7 p.m. you watch the news. In the age of curation, really, it's watch what you want to watch, when you want to watch it, as you are, and anywhere you are. So I think that's really the difference in how we consume content, and where we're moving to in a space where content is really curated by the user, by ourselves, by what we want to watch, and our own moods and who we're watching with.
Yeah, and in your experience, what has been the appetite of consumers in terms of media? Is there a particular genre, or does it have to do with the demographics as well?
I think content's a very interesting thing, because for every single market and every single interest and every single sort of micro sort of interest, there's a piece of content out there for you. In the age of curation, what that means really is that there's growth in every single content. The more content that is produced, the more content that is consumed. We see major macro trends and international trends where we see things like sport moving into the VOD space, with a rights battle being that tug of war going on around there. We see movies being released only on streaming, but we're familiar with that from a sort of direct to DVD release. I think the exciting space we see now, we see international players becoming exclusive license holders of major sporting events like the MLS or in fact the F1. We see that the local battle with the Rugby World Cup between MultiChoice and SABC. So sport's going to be a really interesting battleground in the next few years as we move forward into this sort of digital consumption space of content available everywhere.
Yeah, but in the interest of access to information and content, as you're saying, particularly when it comes to the national broadcaster and its mandate, that's a tricky one. You know, you spoke about the sporting rights that the MultiChoice is not necessarily going to relinquish, because that is something that obviously feeds into their bottom line. Do you think that those are conversations that are likely to be ventilated on how we ensure that there is adequate access to information where it matters?
I think it's quite an interesting conversation that's been raging on for a number of years already, and it's going to continue to rage and possibly get more important as we go forward, because it's really a balancing act between the public interest and access to content, which is important to the local and macro conversation, i.e. watching the Rugby World Cup to a mass South African audience, I think is naturally important, but also balancing that act equally so with the commercial gains. This is not a MultiChoice commercial gain. This is down to the South African Rugby Union financial gain, because they're the ones who benefit from the rights, selling off those commercial and broadcast rights into different players. Because remember, ultimately, that broadcast rights is what funds our sport. So balancing this pipeline of funding sport, funding the full pyramid of sport through TV rights, while also ensuring that you get access and inspire the nations through giving them access to that sport, is going to be an interesting balancing act as we go forward. I think the challenge we have ultimately is that it all comes down to the bottom line, where for all the best intentions, having the right a need to get the information out to as wide a public as possible, you also got to balance that with a commercial need that we've got to fund our sport and fund the entire pyramid right the way from grassroots all the way through a World Cup winning national team.
Yeah, and what are the trends going forward? Will we see likely more competition, new players in the space? We have the ETV or eMedia, for example, with the Open HD View, which is a once-off purchase of a set-top box, and you watch content essentially for free. Are we likely to see more of those kind of disruptors in the market?
I think the real disruption, quite frankly, is the removal of the paywall, which OVHD has done, which different streaming services have done, including YouTube and View. What I think is really interesting is that the changing business model in this sort of content space, where before to access high quality content, you would need to pay a monthly subscription, whether that be to Netflix or to MultiChoice. The changing business model would mean that the general consumer could access high quality content in a way that doesn't need them to pay a monthly subscription fee, and will again bring the conversation of advertising back into the conversation around how content is distributed and delivered through either VOD or broadcast. The interesting part about it is that going forward is that the business model of licensing will change, and the business model around how content is distributed, whether it's through OVHD, through a set-top box, through DTT going forward in 12 months' time, through free streaming apps. This could include YouTube or even Facebook, who's already entered into the space in other global markets where they've acquired sporting rights and distributed them for free of charge through the social network. So that the trend is definitely there. The experimentation is happening. It's about figuring out which business model works for both the consumer, ultimately, because audiences is the currency, but ultimately converting that currency into actual commercial value is where we have to find the balance.
And Leslie, of course, there's a lot of opportunities, as you're saying, for content creators or those in the media space. Even when it comes to developing platforms like your apps for streaming purposes, that they could find themselves, hitting the jackpot, as it were, in terms of, lucrative deals in playing in this space. But we'll leave it there for the moment. Leslie Adams, he's the sales director at Streaming Experts Reach Africa, talking to us about the changing landscape of streaming and video on demand. We'll take a